We'll just give it a few more minutes to let more people come in. Okay, I think we might get started. We'll let people come in. Welcome everyone to today's webinar about applying for a student visa. Before we get started, on behalf of the Swindon Student Union, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands on which we meet. We acknowledge that we meet on stolen lands and that the sovereignty of these lands were never ceded. The Union honors the elders past, present, and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I might just introduce our panelists now. First of all, we have Shashima, who's a registered migration agent. We have Connie, who's a community lawyer from Eastern Community Legal Center. We also have Trish, who's also a migration agent, who's here to help answer questions. And we also have Swinburne's very own Desmond Smith, Associate Director of the International Student Advisory and Support, the ISA team. I'd also like to remind everyone that you can send in your questions using the Q&A function. You can send them in anonymously, so do take advantage of that. That being said, I think we might get started. So I'll hand over to Desma to start us off.
Thank you. If I share, is my share screen? Can I share my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Almost. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to start while Budveen's setting that up. Just wanted to start by thanking Budveen and the SSU for inviting me to be with you today. Let me share. Let me share. How's that?
It's working.
As he said, I'm the Associate Director of the ISA team and the support team here at Swinburne. So you should have met us already, I'm pretty sure, at one of your international student welcomes. Or perhaps at some time found your way to one of our activities or events. I know the Bush and Beach program is very popular, and so you might have been on that, or celebrate your heritage when we do that in later in the year. And hopefully, if you've needed some personal support and advice, you've found your way to an individual appointment with an ISA along the way. So this screen is just quickly to remind you of the various things that we can help you with. We'll help you to understand your rights and responsibilities, especially those of you on student visas, and I'm hoping that's all of you in this session today. And I'll go back one. Who did that? Somebody, are you playing with that, Budveen?
Nope.
So rights and responsibilities, yeah, anything that you don't understand. Australia can be a pretty confusing place sometimes, and we want you to understand how best to get through the things that you need to do around your study and also within your study. We'll help you with personal issues if they're impacting your ability to be successful in your studies. That's what we're here for. You may or may not know we have a specialist accommodation advisor just for international students. I'm sure Sam's helped a lot of you at different times. We'll help you with safety issues. It's very much our forte. We also have a specialist why does that keep happening? A specialist employability advisor in the team. So I'm sure you've probably found your way to some of Olivia's sessions, and she runs them all throughout the year, so keep an eye on that. We also manage critical incidents, and unfortunately, when you're here in a different country, sometimes things do happen that are unexpected. Sometimes, what if we had an emergency appendectomy? Things just happen. Life keeps happening while you're here. So our team is always available to help you when things aren't quite as you expected them to be, and we hope that you'll reach out for that. And when there's things in your home country that might be affecting your ability to be successful in your studies, that's really what we hope for you. So I hope you'll contact us, and all the details are there for you, and you can find us on the website. Specific to today's session with you, you know that there are specific visa conditions that it's your responsibility to manage. The one on this slide that I draw your attention to most importantly, please, is to keep your address and your phone number, your contact details updated on your student record, because those things are really important to immigration. If they ring me and say, this name, this address, this name, this date of birth, what do you know about them? We are under mandatory conditions to provide information to them, and that is a condition of your visa. So just a little warning, keep it updated. And also, when there are critical incidents, you know, it's great for us to be able to know who your emergency contacts are, and also how to find you. Even more specific, and finally, for today's presentation, when you get to the point where you need to renew your visa, you must have a new confirmation of enrolment, and you can only get that from your education provider. So please ask early. You can see there in the notes, it's the advice from the compliance team that it does take them time to turn over COEs. They must be issued based on the amount of study you have to complete, and that has to be checked with the faculty and with your student records. So do give them some time, especially in peak times. We know that visas generally have finishing dates around end of July and the end of March, and so they would be peak times for that compliance team. So please don't leave it to the last minute. Can't ring us today and say my visa expires tomorrow. I really need a new COE. That just may not be possible, and we don't want to put you in that position. Okay. So I think everything that needs to be said is on that screen. So I think that's about it. Budveen, I'll hand over to your other guests.
Awesome. Thank you very much for making the time, Desmond.
Okay.
Connie, over to you.
Sorry, let me just get some the screen sharing set up. All right, so my name's Connie. I'm just going to do some introductory info about where I'm from, the Eastern Community Legal Centre, and what we do, and the ways that we might be able to help you. So just some webinar housekeeping. So if you're not familiar with the webinar format already, and as you can see in chat as well, that your microphones and your cameras are disabled, except for only the presenters can really speak. If you have a question, you can use the Q&A function. Don't use the chat function. That helps everyone sees your questions. And then when those questions are answered, they will be seen by others. So you may have a general question, or we might have 10 of the same question. So to save us from answering 10 questions 10 times with the same answer, your question will be seen by others, and we might put those questions aside. Please be aware that the webinar is being recorded, which means that you can choose to ask the question anonymously to have your name not associated with the question. But if you do have your name associated with the question, just be aware that your name could get read out. Then lastly, like a message to people who might be watching this as a recording. The laws and policies are changing really, really, really quickly at the moment. We are recording this at the moment on the 5th of August, 2020. I don't know when you're going to be watching this, but please make sure you've got the most up-to-date information, because the information we have today may be out of date depending on when you watch this. So just be aware. Some last webinar housekeeping. So this student is about, this session is about applying for a new student visa, extending your student visa, which is just really applying for another one. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the webinar format, we cannot answer specific questions about your specific circumstances. We can only answer general questions, and we can't answer questions about other visa types. That's just a little bit outside of what our topics are today. If you do need specific advice, we recommend you go to the MARA website. So that's the professional body for migration agents, and to speak to a registered migration agent to give you migration advice about your visa, and highly recommend you speak to a migration agent and not sort of friends or family. First of all, it's illegal for people who are not migration agents to give migration advice. And then secondly, because the landscape is changing so quickly, even if your friends and family mean well, they may not have the most up-to-date information, whereas a migration agent should. So just be a bit careful about that. Last thing, I just wanted to talk about what we're going to cover today. So I did see that there was a question as soon as we started. There was already a question in the Q&A. I'm just asking students to be a little bit patient. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation, but this is what we'll be covering. So we'll talk about the process for applying for a new student visa first, and then we will address specific COVID-19 changes and concerns. So a lot of FAQs, like common questions we get from students, and then we'll take general questions from you. So yeah, definitely if you want further information or a bit more detail about what we speak about, use the Q&A function, but just be a bit patient about some of those general questions, because it's very likely that we're going to be able to answer them through the course of the presentation. And there will be time for questions at the end. So if we don't get around to your question, then you can always answer them at the end. All right, so I think it's over to Shashima. I'll click through, and Shashima, you let me know when you want a new slide. Oh wait, no, sorry, I forgot the slide. Sorry, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Eastern Community Legal Centre. You can contact us for free legal information advice, and in limited cases, some representation. As you can see, we only give advice in certain areas of law. So things like family law and family violence and fines. Unfortunately, there are lots of common areas of law that students need help with that we don't give advice in. With migration law, as I've said, I'd recommend you go to the MARA website to have a look at the migration agents listed there. with employment law and tenancy and renting law, there are some legal help clinics out at Study Melbourne. I've put the URL at the bottom of this slide, and they're a great place to go. They're run by our friends at West Justice, and they provide a really high quality service to all international students in Melbourne. So you can go to that website and they will provide you some free advice. So this is our contact details. So if you do have an issue with one of the areas of law from the previous slide, or you're just not sure where to go, you're not really sure if we can or can't provide that advice, you can give us a call or contact us. At the moment, unfortunately, we don't have super high-tech a super high-tech phone system, which means that you actually have to leave a voicemail if you call in, and an intake worker will call you back, but someone will call you back. That voicemail is being monitored every day, and then we'll have a phone upgrade coming soon. If you do see one of our lawyers through the generalist service, and so you're eligible for our service because you study out in the east, and our catchment area covers what we say Hawthorn to Hillsville. So because you study out in the east, you are eligible for our generalist services. And so if you go through appointment with our go through intake with one of our intake workers, you'll be provided a phone or a Zoom appointment because of COVID restrictions, obviously. All right, I think I've actually covered everything. There's our website, you can find out more about us. All right, now over to you, Shashima.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Hi, everyone. So my name is Shashima, as we've been introduced. As today, I'm going to explain you the process of how to apply for a new student visa. Actually, this is a very broad area, so I may not be able to cover every single area or every single bit of this, but I will try to give you a basic overview, a general overview, how to apply for a new student visa by yourself. So if your current student visa is expiring and if you haven't completed your studies yet, then you will need to apply for a new student visa. Because there's no such thing as visa extension. So it's a new application, new visa application. So you will need to start the process as for a new visa. You can do it by yourself. It's not mandatory to use a registered migration agent or get registered migration agent assistance to lodge your application. The department doesn't discriminate or favor because of that point, whether you used an agent or not. However, you might want to seek advice from registered migration agent if the situation is complicated or if you don't having confidence to do that by yourself, but it's up to you. What I want to explain you here is that it's not mandatory to use a migration agent. It's up to you to decide. However, if you choose to use a migration agent, as Connie mentioned, so we strongly suggest you to appoint a registered migration agent, and you can check whether they are registered under Migration Agent Registration Authority, because that is the regulatory body to govern migration agents, and they have responsibilities towards their clients. And as a client, if you don't get a proper service from your agent, you can even make a complaint against them. So you have that legal framework as a client if you go with a registered migration agent. So we strongly suggest, I advise you to appoint a registered migration agent if you choose to go with one. All right, so before I start explaining the process, I would like you to have a look your current visa grant letter to see whether you have a condition called no further stay condition number 8534, just in case. Normally this condition is not attached to offshore student visa grant. So I would assume almost all you are here currently holding a student visa that was granted outside Australia. So in those circumstances, it's highly unlikely. Normally, it's not attached to such student visa grants. However, if you are here previously on different temporary visas, and if you previously applied for maybe student visa in Australia, sometimes this condition can be attached to your student visa. So the thing is, if you have this condition by any chance, then you can't apply for a student visa while in Australia. You can do it outside Australia, but not in Australia. So as I said before, it's unlikely to have in most of your grant letters, but worth checking it before you start doing this. So the application process is an online application process. You have to create an ECLC to the Department of Home Affairs website, and then you have to provide required documentation, evidence to support your application. Obviously, you have to pay the visa application charge unless you are exempted. And also you might need to complete medical examination, that is if required. Can I have the next slide, please, Connie? Okay, so I have provided some screen cap from the Department of Home Affairs website. So if you go to the Department of Home Affairs website to create an ECLC, you will see a tab called ECLC. You can click there. Next slide, please. And then you will get into a page like this, and there you can see create an ECLC. So if you already have an ECLC, you can use that. You don't need to create another one. But if you don't have one, then you can create a new ECLC. So if you click there, then you will take into a page, it will be taken into a page that open up an account. So it's like an online account. So you have to fill some information and create an online account. Next slide, please. Once you have created your ECLC, then anytime you can log into that account, you will have your username and password. When you log into your ECLC, then you will see a page like this. And then under My Applications, you can open up a new application. And if you click New Application, then you will get a list of visa categories. Obviously, you will have to apply for a student visa, then you have to click student. Next slide, please. Under student, there are 3 subcategories. If you are applying for a student visa as a primary applicant in Australia or even outside Australia, then you have to apply for subclass 500. Student subclass 500 is the subclass you have to apply. So that we don't have those other categories. It's subclass 500 for all students. So you click there and then it will open up an online application. Then you will have to fill up that application online. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is about a 10 or so page application. So my advice is to complete the application correctly, don't lie in the application, provide all the correct information. However, I have selected some questions here because when I'm dealing with students, sometimes I find they're a bit confused how to answer some questions. So I have selected some questions here. I'm not going to answer or discuss all the questions in that form. They're basically quite straightforward, like your personal details, address, travel history, visas, that sort of information as applicable to you. I have selected this question. So the first one is, there's a question relating to closure of education provider. So there's a question, is the applicant applying for this visa due to the closure of their Australian education provider? So this relates to education provider default. So that can happen if your provider, that's Swinburne University, cannot provide a course, or for example, if the provider closed down. So in that situation, then the answer will be yes. So I specifically selected this question. Actually, we had a situation where a student came to us, and not a Swinburne student from another university came to us and told, I lodged the student visa application, but after a couple of days, I received it saying it is invalid. So we had a look. So the student had advised yes to this question, whereas that university is not closed down. So there's no issue like that with that university. So what will happen if you answer yes to this question, then there is no visa application charge for this. So it will proceed through and it will get submitted. Otherwise, you will come to the fee payment page and you can't go through that page unless you made the payment. But because there's no visa application charge for this situation, then it went through, but it deemed as invalid application because the provider or that university is not closed down, and you should pay the visa application fee. And if you don't do that, it is an invalid application. So that's why I particularly selected this question. Unless you have specific information relating your course or any related program that you are enrolled, so the answer should be no. Otherwise, that's what will happen. The other one I selected is about the family members. There are two questions relating to this. One is, are there any accompanying members of the family unit included this application? So the family unit member means for a student visa application, spouse, de facto partner. If you have a spouse or a de facto partner, or if you have a dependent child who is under 18 and who is not married. So only those people are considered as member of family unit. So the accompanying member of family unit means if you have a family member that you need to include in your application. So you are going to make a combined application with them. You want them to come to Australia with you on the student visa. You want them to have a student visa along with you. So that's why accompanying means. So if you are outside Australia, you may want to include your wife or partner or your dependent children to come to Australia. If you are in Australia currently with your family members, again, you may want to include them in your current student visa application, then they are the accompanying member of family unit. So you have to include them as accompanying family members if you want them a visa. The non-accompanying members of the family unit means, so the family unit member definition is again the same. Non-accompanying means they don't want to come to Australia with you at this stage, or they are outside Australia currently. So they are included under non-accompanying members of the family unit. And also the question asked for other relatives such as siblings and both parents. So you will need to provide that information under other family members. The other question I selected is genuine temporary entrant criterion. So applicant genuinely intends that temporary stay in Australia, having regard to the applicant's circumstances, the applicant's immigration history, and any other relevant matters. So those type of things can be considered by the case officer. I will discuss a little bit more in a later slide about this, how to address this. But basically, you will need to write a statement addressing GTE. You may have already written that as part of your current student visa application, a statement called Statement of Purpose, SOP. In that statement, you can address what sort of research you have done about Australia, about Swinburne, about the course, why you are studying this course, why you study this course in Australia over in any other country, whether you have similar courses in your home country, but why you want to study it in Australia particularly, and what are the benefits you are getting at the end of this course. That sort of information you can include in the statement. So the idea is that you indicate the department or tell the department that you are genuinely intend to stay temporarily in Australia as a student. So your primary purpose is to get Australian study. Next slide, please. And the other important question is funding. Of course, this is one major assessment criteria as well. So the question in the application form asks, do all applicants in this application confirm that they each have access to sufficient funds to support themselves for the total period of stay in Australia, and understand that further evidence of funds may also be requested. So the question asks whether you have enough money or enough support, financial support, to cover the total period of your stay in Australia. So I have highlighted that wording. So you have to declare that you have money not just for the first 12 months, but for the full duration you are planning to stay in Australia. So if your course duration, because you are applying for a new student visa just to complete your course, it may be less than 12 months in many occasions, but it might be more than 12 months. So if it is less than 12 months, that's fine for the duration you intend to stay. But if it is more than 12 months, then this question asks you to declare that, yes, I have enough money to cover my expenses. I will explain in a later slide when we discuss about the evidence, if you have to provide evidence, for how long you have to provide evidence. But the question asks you to declare whether you have money, enough funding to cover the full duration. So all applicants, including their family members who are included in the application. For example, if you have family member who want to come to Australia to join you, then also they all meet this requirement. So you are declaring that not only for you, but also for your family members, you have enough money to cover expenses. Also, this question also says that if required, that you will need to provide evidence at a later stage. So during the processing, I will go to what documents you might need to provide with the application and what documents you might ask to provide during the processing. So evidence of funding, sometimes you might need to provide evidence, like a printable evidence, such as bank statements or annual income, evidence of annual income, those things. However, this is just a declaration, sort of, in the application form. And the other one is actually OSHC, Overseas Student Health Cover. So does the applicant have overseas student health cover? So obviously it has to be yes, unless you are exempted. You will have to provide evidence also. Sometimes university will arrange this for students, but you can also arrange it by yourself. If university arrange it, it's included in the COE. So then you will need to provide the start date and end date. But if you arrange it, there will be a little bit more information you will have to provide that. It's quite self-explanatory question, but you will have to have an OSHC. And I will explain it a little bit more detail, what are the exemptions and what type of OSHC are acceptable for a student visa. And the other question, visa history. So you have to declare or disclose all the visas you have ever held, not only to Australia, to any other country. If you have held a visa maybe 10 years ago, say to UK, New Zealand, those visas you will need to disclose. And again, health and character declaration. So like for any other visa, you will need to meet health and character criteria. And there are 2 declarations. So you have to declare correct information there. It's just basically providing correct information. That's the main thing. That's the important thing, because providing incorrect information, even though you think that it can affect negatively to your visa application, you should provide the correct information. Otherwise, it can cause serious consequences down the track. It may affect negatively, but there are some concessions or some waiver provisions applicable. So you may want to check those exemptions rather than providing incorrect information in the form. Next slide, please. Okay, and also, once you have completed your application form, you will prompt to a page to upload evidence. And then you have to find out what are the documents you have to provide with your application. So you have to provide documents as per Department of Home Affairs document checklist tool. That is actually a web evidentiary tool. So under this streamlined student visa framework, the combined immigration risk outcome of your education provider, Swinburne, and your country of citizenship will be used to guide the level of documentary evidence of English language and financial capacity that you need to provide with your application. To find that, we can use this document checklist tool. However, the case officer might ask for the documentation during the processing, even though they are not listed in this evidentiary tool. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I have again provided this screen cap from the Department of Home Affairs website. So if you go to the students of class 500, you can see under step by step, you will see this document checklist tool. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the document checklist tool is like this. So you have to provide your country of passport and the provider name. You can select Swinburne and your country of passport. And there are some additional questions you will need to answer, whether you are a defense or foreign affairs a sponsored student, exchange student, or a PhD student that you need time to remain in Australia during thesis marking, so that sort of thing. So you can select those questions as applicable to you. And then if you click display evidence, it will show you what are the documents or the evidence you will need to provide with your application. So the thing you have to remember is you should provide documentation according to this document checklist tool. Otherwise, the case officer even can refuse your application. If you do not provide any documents according to this list, the case officer can even refuse your application without giving an opportunity to provide that evidence later on. If anything is not listed in this list, then the case officer must send you a request to provide that evidence later on, even though they want to refuse it. Before they refuse that, they should send you that request. However, anything listed in this checklist tool, they have the discretionary power to refuse if you do not provide that. So that's the important thing. And the other thing I want to let you know is that this checklist is not a customized one. This will have information, for example, relates to under 18 students, assuming our audience is over 18. So you may not need to provide those documents, for example, welfare arrangement for under 18 students or parental consent. So those evidence or those documents, you don't need to worry because it's not a customized list. And also this list will ask you to provide evidence of your employments, like employment contracts or CVs, pay slips. You don't necessarily need to provide those evidence. It will not, the department will not refuse your application just because it will provide evidence of employment. However, there will be a question in the application form to answer all your employment and unemployment history. So you have to provide that information there correctly. However, not necessary to provide evidence of employment. And also it will ask you to provide Form 956, that only if you go with the migration agent. Otherwise, all the correspondence communication should direct to yourself. You can lodge it by yourself. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are requirements to make a valid visa application, as well as there are requirements to be granted a visa. So I'm going to discuss very briefly maybe about the requirements to make a valid visa application. The application must be online, or you should have authority to lodge a paper application. There are very, very limited circumstances that the department would grant authority to lodge a paper application. So basically it's online. And you should hold an eligible visa if you are in Australia. So there are some ineligible visas. So for example, domestic worker or temporary work, international relations, or domestic worker international diplomat based on or transit visa, for example, or visitor visa based on sponsored family stream or approved destination stream. I don't think that you need to worry about this ineligible visa, because I would assume almost all you are currently holding student visa, so it's an eligible visa. And you have to accompany evidence of intended study. So which means you have to provide that COE number in the application form. It's a requirement to make a valid visa application. If you don't have that, then it will be deemed as an invalid application. So you can provide COE or letter of offer if you are in Australia, but if you are outside Australia, then you must provide a COE. And I think Desma explained how to obtain the COE. That's really useful information for you, I guess. So you can go to those information relating how to obtain a new COE, because that's one primary criteria or one first step you will need to have before starting applying for a new student visa. For secondary exchange student, the evidence of intended study will be secondary exchange acceptance advice of secondary exchange students, ACS, and also if you are sponsored by Department of Foreign Affairs or Defense, then you can provide a letter from them. Also, if you are a PhD student, so this might be applicable for some students, I don't know. So if you are a postgraduate student and if you need more time to remain in Australia during the thesis marking, so you may have finished your studies and you have submitted your thesis, but it might take some time back and forth, and you might need some time to remain in Australia until you make those changes and finish that program. Then you can provide a letter for postgraduate thesis marking as issued by an Australian education provider for postgraduate researchers who are required to remain in Australia for the marking of their thesis. All right? And if you don't hold a substantive visa, say for an example, if you don't hold a student visa, then there are additional requirements that you will need to meet, like you should make the application within 28 days. But I'm not going to talk in too much detail about those things. So there are specific circumstances, and if you think that your situation might come under any of these special situations, then obviously you will need to seek advice on your particular circumstances. And also there are additional requirements if you are an under 18 student, but assuming our audience is over 18 student, I'm not going to discuss those specific requirements in detail as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so the other requirement is that you should meet criteria to be granted a visa as well. So again, the evidence of enrollment, so you can provide the COE or ongoing marking of the postgraduate thesis or letter from Foreign Affairs or Defense student if they are sponsored by those organizations or the departments. If you're offshore, you should provide a COE, onshore COE or a letter of offer. Again, secondary exchange students, a particular documentation. So basically evidence of enrollment, the common document is COE, or if you're a postgraduate student, that's letter from the university. And also you have to meet the temporary, genuine temporary entrant criteria. As I mentioned before, you have to write a statement. You can either write that statement in the application form itself. As I remember, there is, I think, 3,000 or so character limit to that. If you can write that in the box, then that's fine, you can do so, or you can write a separate statement, sign it and upload with your documentation at the end. It's up to you, it doesn't really matter as long as you address this criteria. So the idea is that you genuinely intend to stay temporarily in Australia for your study. So the case officer will look at your immigration history, your circumstances in your home country, your circumstances in Australia, and what benefit you would get by studying this course, and that sort of thing. So the thing is, I personally would like students to write a comprehensive statement, even though this is a new student visa, to cover your existing study, because this is a new student visa. Yes, you have already written most of the information like your background back home and what benefit you are getting by studying this course and what your expectation, what research you did about the country or the university. But the thing is actually the department or the case officer doesn't really go back and check those documents to support your application. Obviously, they might go and check the information if they want to catch you on something, if you like. So like providing incorrect information, say, oh, you previously provided this information to us, but now you're telling this, tell us why. And we are going to refuse your application based on that inconsistency. So that type of thing can happen, but not necessarily they go and check any documentation that you provided before to support your application. So because of that, I would like to write a comprehensive statement. But the problem with that is sometimes I have heard from students saying, oh, I didn't write my statement before, my agent wrote it. I know some education agents offshore, they write statements on behalf of students. That's not really the way they have to do. So the statement should come from the applicant, from you. So you have to write the statement. They might make changes or suggest changes, but it has to be your statement. So if you don't know what you wrote before, then it may not be a good idea to write a too detailed statement. But in addition to what you mentioned before, as part of your current student visa, the thing you have to add to this statement is why you need to have a new student visa. Explain what happened and why you couldn't complete your course as scheduled before. And obviously, you can mention that the university has approved your request and you got the COE, so that's why you're applying for a new student visa. So explain what happened and why you need a new student visa as well, in addition to what are your expectations and what benefit you would get for by studying this course. And the other thing is English language proficiency. So that is if required. So for most of the streamlined visa applications, maybe I think 75% or over streamlined visa applications, you don't necessarily need to provide English language proficiency. So it's highly unlikely that if you come under streamlined visa processing framework, that come up in the documentary checklist tool. So if the document checklist tool doesn't say that you need to provide English language proficiency, evidence of English language proficiency, it's highly unlikely that you will need to provide during the processing. However, there are some occasions where our case officer can ask you to provide English language test results during the processing, even though it didn't come up before when you launched the application in that web evidentiary tool. Occasions like if there are pre-existing intelligence to the department about the level of your English, or if the department conduct an interview, for example, and they suspect about the level of English. So that sort of situations can prompt them to ask you to provide English language proficiency, evidence of English language proficiency. Otherwise, it's unlikely. And also, obviously, if you mention in your application saying that you don't have that level of English, then again, the case officer might ask you to provide during the processing. And the other thing is the genuine access to funds. So you have to meet this requirement, and if the document checklist tool doesn't ask you to provide, it's okay to lodge your application without evidence. So I explained how to answer the question in the application form, that it is for the full duration. But if the checklist tool, so it depends on the immigration risk rating as well as the country of passport. So it's most of the time, I don't think that you will need to provide evidence of funding according to the document checklist tool. So, so most of those low risk applicants or students come under streamlined student visa framework. The evidence may be the way of declaration only. So that is the declaration we discussed in the application form. However, a requirement to have funds available and declaration made allows the department to request evidence during the processing. So keep in mind, even though the checklist tool says that you don't need to provide, it doesn't say you don't need to, it doesn't show that it is a requirement that you have to provide evidence. But during the processing, case officer might come back and ask you to provide evidence. They do randomly pick up applications and ask providing evidence during the processing. So that happens even though you are from a low risk country. Be careful because you should have evidence if they ask to provide. But I suggest high risk passport holders, though, if they have enough money in their statements, or if they need sufficient funding, then they might want to provide the evidence anyway with the application form, because that is one major aspect of assessing a student visa application. You should have enough money to cover your expenses, and if it is the evidence that is for the first 12 months. And the type of evidence you can provide, there are different types of evidence you can provide. So you can use your partner, spouse, if you have one, earning, their annual income, or your parents' annual income. So parents' annual income can be combined annual income. If you are the only primary applicant, the annual income has to be Australian dollars 62,222 Australian dollars per annum. And if you have dependent family members that need to be included in your application, so they are migrating family members, so they want to come to Australia with you, not just they stay at home or without joining you. So if you have someone who want to join you in Australia, then the annual income will be Australian dollars 72,592 per annum, and you will need to provide the most recent tax documentation or equivalent in that country. And also, if you are relying on your partner or spouse's annual income, so and if they are coming to Australia as a dependent, then this may not be acceptable, because the case officer then definitely will look at if you can still earn this much of annual income if you are here in Australia, because there are work limitations as well. So it's not something you can earn in Australia, but the annual income you would normally gain in your home country. And also you can meet evidence of funding by providing evidence of money deposits or the money in bank statements or the financial institution. And there is a calculation for the money if you are using money. It can be your money or in your bank account, your parents' bank account. Generally, it can be anyone in anyone's bank account, but the idea is genuine access to funding. So whether or not you have genuine access to that funding can be an issue if the money is in someone else's name, for example, other than a close family member, for example, a friend. So the case officer will assess the relationship between you and the person who providing financial support, and then they can raise concerns if they are like a distant relative or a friend, for example. So the calculation for funding is if you are using money, money deposit, for example, the cost of living for the 12 months, because you have to provide evidence for the first 12 months. And also you can use this same calculation to calculate the money you're going to declare in the application form as well. So this is the same calculation for both. But if you are providing evidence, that is only for the 12 months. So the cost of living for the primary applicant, it will be 21,041 Australian dollars. And for your partner or spouse, then it will be 7,362. If you have a dependent child included in your application, so they're all planning to stay in Australia with you. Not that you have a family, but they don't come to Australia. So then you don't need to calculate funding for your family members, only if they want to come to Australia or if they are in Australia. And if you have a dependent child, then it will be 3,152 per child. And also if you have school age children, then again you have to add up additional 8,296 per child. However, children of a doctoral degree student, a foreign affairs student, or a defense student, or a Commonwealth sponsored student are exempted. So they can enroll their children in public schools, and there's no fee for them. So they don't need to provide this school fees for them. And the other thing is arrangement for health insurance or student health cover during the period of
Sorry,
intended stay.
Shashima.
Yep.
I've just got a question. I know we were going to do questions at the end, but I think this question is probably worth answering while we're still on the issue of talking about financial evidence.
Yep.
So I've got a question from an anonymous attendee. They said, so for showing the financial status, if I need to extend for one semester, is there a specific amount I should show, or just my job details and my salary would show that? So I'm guessing they're asking this job details and salary, they mean pay slips or something like that.
Yes. Yes, definitely we can answer that. So the calculation can be pro rata. If the duration you intend to stay in Australia, the full duration is less than 12 months, it is pro rata. So you can calculate the pro rata. So what you have to do is you can divide this 21,041 Australian dollars by 365 days and multiply by the number of days you're planning to stay in Australia. So that's how you calculate. And also on top of that, you have to add the any unpaid tuition fees. If you have any unpaid tuition fees, you have to calculate that. So other than the tuition fee and also the travel cost, about a couple of thousand Australian dollars, all other cost of living related expenses, you can calculate pro rata. So that I can't really calculate the full amount for you at this stage. So what you have to do is you have to add any unpaid tuition fees. So for this semester, if you have any unpaid tuition fees, you have to add that couple of thousand Australian dollars for your flight tickets. And the cost of living, if you are the only one or the primary applicant, you don't have family members, then you have to calculate 21,041 Australian dollars pro rata for the duration you are planning to stay. And normally your job or your employment or pay slips will not be considered as sufficient, because the thing is the student visa policy doesn't really accept pay as you go. So you should either have your you can be supported by your parents. So you can either need to show money or annual income or maybe a loan. So there are different ways of providing evidence of funding, not just the bank statements. You can get a loan, maybe a scholarship, or what else? Sometimes provident funds in some countries, but there are some restrictions around that. So your employment or pay slips in Australia will not be assessed as sufficient to meet the funding, because it's something that you earn and pay. But at the time you make the application, you should declare and you should have financial capacity. Your parents or spouse can use their ongoing income earnings, but not yours. I think that's clear. Okay, so after the access of funding, then the overseas student health cover. So again, you will have to have an overseas student health cover and you have to provide evidence of that. You have to provide this unless you are exempted. So only Belgium, Norwegian and Swedish students are exempted, but there are some requirements as well. So Belgium and Norway students are exempted, but Swedish students, they should have to have a particular insurance to get this exemption. So that is, if I pronounce correctly, I apologize about my pronunciation. So the Swedish students who take out health insurance with Kammarkollegiet, I don't know whether I pronounced it correctly, but that is basically from the Swedish Legal Finance and Administration Agency. So unless they have a health insurance from that particular agency, again, they also will need to provide OSHC as part of their student visa application. Also, there are some students who are in Australia that have this reciprocal health care arrangement with Australian government, but unless they come under any of these exempt people, basically Belgium, they also have to have an OSC. And also there are some students who have Medicare access temporary. For example, if they have applied for a permanent visa in Australia, they may have Medicare access to Medicare, but still they have to have an overseas student health cover. And also there are approved health insurance providers in Australia. So you have to make arrangement with one of these approved health insurance providers. So they are AHM, Australian Health Management, Allianz Global, and Bupa, CPHS International Health, Medibank Private, and NIB OSC. So they are the approved health insurance providers for student visas in Australia. And the department doesn't care, so it's also acceptable to have single policies if there are family members, so they don't need to be combined applications. So that is only from the department's perspective or as a requirement for the visa. However, I strongly suggest you to check with your health insurance provider, because I have heard sometimes there may be some issues in terms of claims if you don't have a say a couple policy or a family policy when there is but if you have two singles but you are a couple, but if you make a claim relate to a couple, then I think there are some issues. So I don't know about that. So you have to check that with your provider. But for the visa, then it's not an issue. Department accepts even two singles for a couple. And also the other important thing you have to remember is if you are arranging also student health cover by yourself. So if university arranges this, so they normally arrange according to the required period. However, if you are doing it, then you have to be careful about the start date and the end date. If you're outside Australia, it has to be at least 1 week before your course commencement date, or the date you plan to enter Australia. Sometimes you may want to enter Australia a couple of weeks before your course start date. Then the OSC also should start on that particular date. If you are in Australia, the date you plan to start your course, it should be fine. And the end date, so that's the other important thing, because I have seen students having visa expiry date just as the COE end date. So the end date depends on the COE end date. So the visa can be granted as follows. Courses that are 10 months or more duration, finishing in November or December, they can be granted visa that ceases 15th March the following year. So for example, if your COE end date is November this year, then you can be granted a visa until 15th March the following year. And also courses that are 10 months or more during duration, finishing in January to October, then should be granted a visa that ceases 2 calendar months after the expected date of course completion. So if your course finishing in January or October, between January and October, then you can have a visa for additional 2 months. And also for PhD students, there will be additional 6 months on top of that period. However, the department cannot grant a visa to cover that additional duration unless you provide an overseas student health cover for that full duration. So that is something you may want to think when you obtain your overseas student health cover. So I have seen students who end up having a visa even before they get their results. So they sometimes have many issues, because we understand many of you would need to lodge further visa applications in Australia. So having this additional period will be really supportive and important. So you have to think about the end date as well. And also you have to meet the health and character test. Obviously, you don't need to provide the OSIS police certificates or Australian Federal Police certificate unless the department asks you to provide. You don't need to do that with your application. And also, it's very, very rare that you would need to provide that as part of your application. It's just a declaration you complete in the application form, mainly the character declaration. And the health, you may or may not need to do another medical examination depending on when you last did your health examination. I'll explain a little bit more later about that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you have a family member to be included in your application form, they also meet the criteria similar to you. So I just don't go discussing this slide in detail. So similar to you, they also have to meet these requirements, all right? So because, yeah, going a little bit over the time, so I think I skip to the next slide. Thanks, Connie. Okay, so the pay the visa application charge. So you will need to pay a visa application charge. The base application fee is 620 Australian dollars. That's for the primary applicant. And if you have a family member included in your application who over 18, the fee will be 460, and secondary applicant under 18, 150. So if you have a dependent child, for example. And also in some occasions, so I had to make this clear, so this will not applicable for many of you, but in some circumstances, there can be a subsequent temporary application charge of $700 that is on top of that base application fee. This is only if you are making a second or subsequent student visa in Australia. So most of you are here on a student visa, and your student visa may have been granted outside Australia for the first time, and you came to Australia for your studies, but now you need to apply for a student visa, and this is going to be your first student visa applying in Australia. Then you will not need to provide this or pay this additional fee. However, say for example, you came to Australia on a visitor visa, and then you applied for a student visa, and then again you have to apply for this visa, then that is a situation where you will need to pay this additional 700. So depending on your circumstances, you may not need to pay this. So and also normally if you are in this situation, the system will automatically calculate this amount. So because we are talking about the application charge, I would like to mention about the exemptions as well. As I mentioned at the first slide also, if you apply or if you answer as yes to the provider default, then there will be no visa application fee, because that is a situation where a government allows students, because it's beyond their control, it's not something, the students shouldn't be penalized because of the default of the provider, or the provider cannot continue with their course. So again, unless you have specific information from your provider, you shouldn't answer the question yes, and you will not be able to have that fee concession. And also foreign affairs and defense sponsored students also exempted from paying fee, and as well as secondary exchange students. And also family members of postgraduate research and also students of foreign affairs and defense sponsored students, family members are exempted from paying a nil. That may be not applicable for many of you, but just in case if there are any, so I just mentioned that. Also, I will discuss another situation where we can access a fee concession or nil back in a few minutes when we discuss the questions about the COVID related issues. Thanks, Connie.
Shashima, there's just one question that would probably be good to answer live. How early would you recommend I apply for my visa renewal?
Okay, so obviously you should do that before your current visa expiry. So the department's advice is normally to launch within 6 weeks before your student expiry, but it doesn't matter. As long as you launch before your current visa expiry, you will get the bridging visa A and that legal bridging visa to remain in Australia legally and make things more easier. Normally, I would say at least a week or so before your current visa expiry, because I just don't want you to leave it at until the last minute, because sometimes this is an online application, so sometimes there can be some system issues because you need to get the bridging visa and you don't really want to be unlawful. At least a week or so before. Best if you can do it within 6 weeks before, but if not, at least a week or so before would be the best. Okay. Yeah, so after lodging an application, you will be granted a bridging visa A to remain in Australia. So as I mentioned, as long as you lodge your application before your current visa expiry, then you will be granted this bridging visa. It fills the gap between the time your current visa expiry and until the lodged application is finalized. So you can remain in Australia without any issue legally. You can even study during that bridging visa A. However, I mentioned that if you do not have a substantive visa before, then you will need to meet additional requirements. So that includes that you could still lodge an application within 28 days of your visa expiry. However, in that situation, you will not get a bridging visa A. So it will be a bridging visa C if you don't have a substantive visa when you lodge the application. However, the bridging visa A doesn't have travel rights. So if you need overseas travels, you would obviously need to apply for a bridging visa B before you travel. The thing is, otherwise you will not be able to come back. However, the student visas can be granted even offshore if you applied onshore. So there's no issue with that. You can apply onshore and you can be outside to the grant. But the thing is, you will not be able to come back if you don't have a bridging visa B. So that's the normal information or in any normal situation. But having said that, I strongly suggest you to reconsider your all travel plans during this travel ban period, because even though with the bridging visa B, you will not be able to come back to Australia if you leave Australia. So think about the travel ban, but in any normal situation, you have to apply for a bridging visa B before you travel, because A doesn't have travel rights. This is a special situation, so you have to be careful about the travel ban. And also the health examination I mentioned before. So you might need to do another medical examination. It depends on the country of passport as well as when you last did your immigration health examination. The health examination is valid only for 12 months. If you have done it more than 12 months before, then you might need to do another medical examination. However, case officer has discretion to add a little bit more, additional 6 months to that. So depending on that, the system might not show that you will need to do another medical examination. So what will happen once you lodge the application, in your application page, you will see a health tab, and if you click that health tab, you will get information whether or not you need to do another medical examination. If the system says that you need to do a medical examination, then you can, if you are in Australia, you can go to Bupa Medical Visa Services website and book for an appointment. You can't go to your favorite GP. It has to be Bupa Medical Visa Services. You have to do your medical examination. And if you're offshore, then you have to go to the immigration approved panel physician. So you can click the link we have provided here to find a panel physician in your home country. However, because of this COVID-19 situation, health examination appointments can be cancelled or rescheduled. However, department understands the situation and they will grant more time to do your medical examination. So it's okay. So normally, if you have to do another medical examination, the system will show you that you need to do. If you haven't done that, when the case officer start processing your application, they also can send you a request giving you mainly 28 days to do the medicals. If you can't do that, even within that 28-day period, that's also fine. Department is a bit lenient on this point during this time. They grant extensions. What I would suggest is that you communicate the case officer. You send an email saying, look, this is an only available appointment, or I can't book an appointment. Don't issue any appointment at the time, so please grant me some more time to do my medical. So that's always possible, and the department understands the situation. Next slide, please. The other thing is biometrics. So this is not necessarily applicable for onshore students in general. But if you are outside Australia and if you're from a country that this biometric program is applicable, then you will need to provide biometrics. And also, again, department is flexible about the duration or the timing. And if you can't do it within the given time frame, you can always ask for extensions. And the other thing I would say here is that sometimes you might need to provide a polio vaccination certificate if you have spent a period of 28 days or longer in some countries that are considered by WHO as higher polio risk countries, countries such as Afghanistan, Congo, Kenya, some such as African countries or Pakistan, PNG. So if you have spent a period of 28 days or longer in any of those countries since 5th May 2014, then you can be requested to provide current polio vaccination certificate. So this list is not a comprehensive list. That is according to the WHO data. So sometimes I had a situation where I lodged an application, and at that time that country was not a polio high-risk country according to WHO, but during the processing it was included, and then the case officer asked to provide polio vaccination during the processing. So that also can happen. But if you are likely to provide this polio vaccination certificate, if you come under any of these requirements or the categories, then the system will automatically trigger and show that you will need to provide polio vaccination certificate. If you have current means administered within 12 months, yes, 1 year's period. If you don't have one, you can just get the vaccine and provide the certificate. And the other thing is changing circumstances during the processing. If you have to update the department of any change of circumstances. So for example, if you change your address, change your contact details, if you got married, you have a child joined your family, so newborn child, so you have to update the department. And this responsibility remains until you are granted, if you are in Australia. If you're outside Australia, this responsibility extends until you first enter Australia on that particular visa. So the other thing is incorrect information. So as I told before, don't lie in the application form, provide correct information all the time. As soon as possible, you have to inform the department if you have made a mistake. As soon as you learn that you have provided incorrect information for some reason, you have to update the department. Sometimes it might even affect your application, but still you have to do that. And this responsibility remains even beyond after you enter Australia or your visa grant. And the visa outcome, I think we are getting to the end, hopefully. So once the departments finalize your application, then they will inform you in writing, mostly via email, the outcome of your application, including visa conditions. And you can be outside Australia when the visa is granted. Next slide, please. Yes, so I think first we might go through briefly these Q&As and then check whether there are any questions, isn't it, Connie and Trish?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about what we've already got on the slides. And yep. I think maybe if we haven't addressed your specific question that we said that we would address, you can feel free to ask it again. Okay. And then we'll answer questions as well after this.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, so because I found that these issues sometimes come from students when I'm dealing with them, so I thought maybe it's useful to include. And as you can see, there's a link. So this is the most up-to-date link from the Department of Home Affairs website that we received this morning. So actually, they have updated the website. So we received some updated information, and we attended the webinar this morning that the Department of Home Affairs representative was there. And so the first thing I mentioned here is that whether you can under-enroll or study part-time without breaching a visa condition. So that is possible because Department of Home Affairs does not regulate the mode of your study requirement. However, as long as your provider, the university accepts your situation and they monitor your study progress and follow the process, and if you can maintain your enrollment, then it should be fine. And also, in normal situation, international students are allowed to study 1/3 of their study load online, but during this time, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standard Agency, as well as the Australian Skills Qualification Authority, made an announcement that they are flexible around this. So you can talk to Swinburne about your personal situation or your specific circumstances if you need to study online. Obviously, almost all you are studying online at the moment.
Add on to that a bit? So like at
Yeah.
Swinburne for this semester, international students can study 3 units.
Okay.
They just have to fill out a form on the website. And if you want to underload even further, just email isa@swin.edu.au and you can talk to them about your situation.
Okay, there you go. Thanks, Budwin. Yeah, so as I told you, so that's the best place is to talk to a student representative or an international student advisor regarding that. So the other thing is my student visa is expiring soon and I cannot go to my home country due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. What are my options to remain in Australia? So this is I specifically aimed for those who don't want to stay in Australia to work mainly, but they just can't go to their home country because of this COVID-19 issue. So in that situation, you may be if you are still studying, obviously, as we discussed, you had to apply for a new student visa for your studies to complete your studies. But if you have completed your studies and you don't want to apply for a further visa to remain in Australia, but you just can't go back to your home country because of the COVID-19 situation, then you may be eligible to apply for a visitor visa to remain in Australia until the situation is sorted out or until you have a flight to return to your home country. So that may be an option for you. However, I'm not going to discuss into detail about the requirements and so on, but just the options available for you. And the other one is if your student visa is expiring soon and if you have completed your course, whether you can apply for a work visa. Yeah, so if you are eligible to apply for temporary graduate visa, that is the most common visa that students would apply after they have completed their studies. So then you will be eligible to apply for that visa in Australia. And if you are not eligible to apply for that visa for some reason, but if you work in a critical area for COVID-19, such as healthcare, disability, NH care, childcare, and agriculture, then you may be eligible to apply for temporary activity subclass 408 visa. That is also another possibility. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so as part of this, I would discuss briefly about the new changes came in very recently. My student visa is expiring soon and I have not yet completed my course. I'm stuck overseas due to travel ban. Do I need to apply for a new student visa? Okay, so if you have received a new COE, you can apply for a new student visa. However, you don't necessarily need a student visa to study online in your home country. However, that's only from student visa perspective, which means if you just want to complete your studies, then you don't necessarily need a student visa to study online in your home country. However, as we hear from the department, so there are some new changes that they are going to implement. So they have announced some concessions for temporary graduate visa applicants, and for that, if you are outside Australia and can't come back to Australia, but you want to apply for temporary graduate visa down the track, then you will need to have a student visa while you are studying outside Australia. So that's something I want to inform you, because I feel like that if I just say, oh, okay, so you don't need to have a student visa to study online offshore, then it should be fine. So it's something that I'm not disclosing you some important information. So, but I'm not going to discuss the requirements in detail. So you may want to check what are the requirements. And I think the Department of Home Affairs website has already updated with those new information about the concessions for temporary graduate visa. You may want to look at there. However, for the student visa, it's something that you don't necessarily need, but you may want to think about it given your future expectation, if your future expectation based on applying for temporary graduate visa. So the department has started granting offshore student visa. So we understood that previously they just didn't process the application. They were kind of on hold for some time during this travel ban period, but now they have started. They said that they have started, or they are starting to grant offshore student visas, and that is to support international students when the borders reopen. You will already have a visa to be able to travel to Australia. So that's the idea of that. And also government announced nil visa application charge for a further student visa application if you are unable to complete your studies with your original visa validity due to COVID-19. So actually that will go online midnight tonight. So from midnight tonight, you will be able to apply for a new student visa. And if you are affected by COVID-19, as I understand, the department mentioned that the criteria to assess whether you are affected by COVID-19 is quite broad. So if you are affected by COVID-19 and because of COVID-19 you could not complete your studies, then you will be able to access this NILVAX. So there will be no visa application fee for you. And after midnight tonight, you will be able to lodge an application without paying the fee if you come under this category. And also, I understand that you should have held a student visa as of 1st of February. So if you are currently holding a student visa, valid student visa, then you would automatically be eligible. So the requirement is that you should have held a student visa on or after 1st of February this year. And also, in addition to this, how they're going to measure whether you are really affected by COVID-19 is that you will have to provide an additional form. Actually, that is form called Form 1545, COVID-19 impacted student. So that is a form for the provider. So university kind of have to complete that and endorse that you are affected by COVID-19. So as long as you have this form, then as I understand, it's quite a flexible, broad approach to access this nil VAC visa application charge. So
I just quickly, sorry, because we had a lot of questions about the visa waiver. So sorry, we changed this a little bit last minute. So oops, sorry, previous, let me just go previous. So this URL up here has the copies of the form and information about the new visa waiver conditions. Because you will need your education provider, so Swinburne Uni, to sign off on it. Unfortunately, Desma's left, so we can't ask her questions about it. But I guess I would be recommending that you send an email to the international student advisors to ask them about the process of filling out that, that form and getting them to sign off on it. I feel like Shishima may have actually frozen. Oh, nope, she's back. All right. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
I'm sorry, Connie, I lost, I think, for a few minutes. So I think you finished explaining the link and everything, isn't it?
Yeah, so I just explained where they can get the form in the link. Okay. And then I also explained that they should contact the ISAs to get them to explain the process for the university to sign off on that waiver form, because we've got a lot of questions about the fee waiver.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Connie. Yes, I was frozen for some time. Okay, yes, next slide, please. I think now we have finished almost, so hopefully it will be questions now.
All right. Do people want to leave it on the resource page, or I mean the resources, the slides will get sent out. People can access the resource page themselves.
Yeah, no, we don't need to discuss that.
Yeah. So we do have one open question, but people, if we haven't addressed any of your concerns, feel free to ask some additional questions through the Q&A function now. So this one is a question about English tests. My
Mhm.
visa requires the provision of an English test. The English test has been cancelled due to COVID-19. Can I lodge my visa application before taking the test because my visa is expiring?
Okay, so if it is for a student visa application, yes, that's fine. You can lodge the application. So I'm not so sure what visa they're going to apply. For a student visa application, yes, you can lodge the application, even though you have to provide English language proficiency. You can provide that during processing. The case officer might ask you to provide or send a request to provide that during processing, but that's fine. As I mentioned before, you can ask for a request as for the medical and other biometrics and other requirements. Yes, for English as well, you can ask for extension of time to provide if you can't do that. However, that is for the student visa, if you're applying for a student visa, because the time of providing these documents can be varied depending on the visa you are applying. From student visa, in student visa context, yes, you can do that during processing. You can lodge the application and do that later. But
So,
if it's not a student visa, then it can be different.
yeah, so I think that same person has added it's for a 485, which is, I think, not a student visa. And so
Yes.
it's outside the scope of our webinar today because we're only talking about student visas. We can't talk about every single visa, otherwise we'll be here for 5 hours, unfortunately. So we'd be recommending that you get speak to a migration agent from Mara about that.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, we've got some more coming in. To extend my student visa, I need to give my medical. So will that be used when I apply for TR, or do I need to give one more medical test?
No, as I told, medical examination or health examination is valid for 12 months. So it is like, again, it depends when you are going to apply for your TR or temporary graduate visa. If it is within 12 months period, then you will not need to provide or do another medical examination because it's another temporary visa. So, but if it is after 12 months, the case officer has discretion to add 6 more months. So sometimes you may be exempted or sometimes you may be asked to do another medical examination. It depends on when you are going to apply for TR. If it's within 12 months, yes, you may not need to do that again.
Cool, I'm just gonna wait a few minutes to see if any more questions come in. In the meantime, while we're waiting, we do appreciate your feedback. And I think Baveen might stick this SurveyMonkey link in the chat as well. So if you could fill out this survey about today's session, it helps, it's going to help the student union understand what students want information about, and then potentially provide you further sessions in the future. So for example, if there's particular visa types that we didn't cover today, it would be good for us to get, well, us and the student union to get that feedback to understand what information, what areas, what visas you'd like further information about. Also, we potentially can provide, we could talk to the student union about providing other sessions in other areas of law as well. All right, we've got a lot of, oh God, they're all coming in. I'll take this one. So someone said, do you mind explaining again how to waive off student visa fees due to the impact of COVID-19? So I will do this.
Okay,
and
thanks.
Shashima, you correct me because I've got control of the slides.
Thank you.
So I don't know if, can you see my cursor? Can everyone see my cursor or can you only, yeah, okay. So you can see my cursor with this COVID-19 and student visas link on the Department of Home Affairs. Because this is very new, they've just updated this to talk about the fee waiver. There is a form on there. You will need to fill out the form and your education provider, Swinburne University, will need to also fill out the form and you will need to submit it together with your visa application, but that doesn't go live until midnight tonight. So don't submit it today, wait until midnight because the visa waiver won't go live until then. There will be more information on here.
Yeah. Thanks, Connie.
Great. I can be a migration agent as well.
Yes.
When should we start the progress of applying for the new visa, including the health examination and asking for a COE before the expiry? So I think it's not just about the visa, it's about getting all the documents together as well.
Yes, I think I mentioned this during the presentation from another question. So the department's advice is to lodge your application 6 weeks before your visa expiry. So that's the best. But if you can't do that, at least a week or so before your expiry, as long as you lodge your visa just before your visa expiry, then you will be granted the bridging visa A. However, because this is an online system, sometimes online systems can have some technical issues, so on, and you may end up not having enough time to lodge the application. So I would suggest at least a week or so before to have peace of mind, so you don't need to worry about any last minute issues and so on. So maybe I think to aim lodging at least a week or so before and start preparing documentation. So the COE is something actually, as Goodwin mentioned before, then you can talk to a school representative about that. So that is outside my scope, how to apply for a COE. And I think this slide, if I'm correct, I think it takes about 10 business days to get, correct me if I'm wrong, Goodwin. Yes, so maybe you will need to have sufficient time for that as well. So the health examination, actually, you don't need to do before you lodge your application. You can do it after, only if it is required. I think that answered, isn't it?
All right, I've got a question and I don't understand it. So, I mean, I'll read it out and you see what you make of it, Shashima. From where will I get my HAP ID, as my old one is not applicable now?
Okay, so HAP ID is the number that you need to do your medical examination. So once you launch the application, as I mentioned before, if you go to the health tab and if you click there, it will show whether or not you need to do another medical examination. Sometimes if you don't need to do that, then the system will say that health clearance provided, no action required, or something like that. But if you need to provide that, then you will see medical examination required, and then you can generate the medical referral letter, and that medical referral letter will have the HAP ID on right hand top corner, so you will get that. So basically you have to take that referral letter with you when you go to the health examination. That is, your subclass is subclass 500, and the HAP ID will be on that medical referral letter.
I'm gonna have a shot at answering one of them.
Okay.
Should I contact an ISA to help me with applying for the visa extension? So the ISAs, I mean, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Shashima, I'll see how much I've learned from you working with you for so long. So the ISAs will help you with your COE, but they are not migration agents and they are not able to give you migration advice. So they can probably walk you through some of the steps and maybe give you some procedural sort of tips on what to do, but they're ultimately not migration agents. So there may be questions that they can't answer about your visa application, in which case you will need to go to the MARA website and speak to a migration agent. Does that sound about right, Shashima?
Yeah, that's right. So as I understand, ISA not exempt, but they can check with their legal department in the university whether they are allowed or come under any of those exemptions. But in general, yes, so unless you are registered with Migration Agent Registration Authority or you come under any of those exemptions, you are not allowed to provide migration advice in Australia. So maybe they're not able to help you. But yeah, so if you have migration issues and if you need assistance, then as Connie mentioned, maybe MARA website to find a registered migration agent.
So the letter that we get, that we will get stating the medical exam has been postponed, who will provide us that letter? Presumably the people who provide you the medical exam?
Yes.
Should we call and ask them, or do we need to make an appointment or to get that letter? I think, okay, maybe if I can try answering this, because you've been talking a lot, Shashim, I'm going to try and take the load off you. My understanding is that this is like a private sort of contract you're entering into with the medical examiner or the people there. So you kind of have to contact them. It's not to do with the Department of Home Affairs. You have to contact them and see whether or not they're open. And I've got another question about medical tests, whether or not they're happening now. You need to contact them to see whether or not they're open, whether or not it's delayed, and to ask them to provide a letter about the appointments that they're delayed, so you can pass that on to Home Affairs. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, yes, that's
Yeah.
right, Connie. Yes,
Yeah.
thanks. Yes.
Yeah.
Because the place is actually, if I add a little to Connie's answer, the place is you have to contact, if you are in Australia, that is Bupa Medical Visa Services. I think we have the link in the slide. And if you are outside Australia, that is Immigration Approved Panel Physician. So they may have closed or they may not go ahead with appointments during this time, but you have to check with them. Yes, as Connie mentioned. Thanks, Connie.
I think that's probably all. We've run a bit over time, so I'm going to maybe put a hold on any further questions, and we don't have any further questions in the Q&A either, and maybe end it there. But Veen, do you want to say a few words about the recording and the availability of slides?
Yep. Okay. Thanks everyone for attending and for the presentation. I think it was really valuable and informative. So the slides and the recording will probably go up on the website and the YouTube channel. Just go back to the Facebook event and you'll see all the links to where we put up stuff. So just go back to the Facebook event and you'll find everything there. And also fill out the feedback survey if you can. Yeah, I think that's it. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Sushima, Connie, and Trish, and Desma. I think we can wrap up now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks
Cheers,
everyone. Thanks for attending.